Florence, 1401. The Signoria of Florence, which is the governance body of Florence, decides to open a contest to finish the doors of the baptistry. The baptistry is the building that I am showing on the bottom left. As you can see, a beautiful medieval building that has gorgeous ornamental, symmetric ornamental facades in a hexagonal construction. But as you can see there, the doors are basically just wood planks. And no, this is not a photograph from 1401. This is a photograph from the 20th century when these doors were taken down for restoration. And I imagine this is the way that people in 1401 were looking at their beautiful building. The doors were missing. So in this contest, they decided to make very specific conditions so that they could judge the different entries in equal terms. They had to be copper plaques because that's how they finally were going to be in the doors. They had to have specific size, margins, and then the images. There was really not much left to the contestants to do an image that they preferred. The image had to always be the same. It's Abraham and Isaac at the moment of the sacrifice. The knife had to be on the right hand of Abraham, and Isaac had to be at least on one knee. And there were other conditions to make sure that the entries were all similar. So the baptistry is the building that's right across from the front entrance of the cathedral. So Santa Maria del Fiori is the Duomo de Firenze. It's the Cathedral of Florence. And it's a very iconic image that we know today, basically because of the huge dome on top of the cathedral. However, in 1401, this cathedral had no dome. It was an open space. They had not built it yet. But they decided to first finish the baptistry. The people continued to gather in the open square or even in the open center of the cathedral without the dome. But first, the baptistry had to be finished. And that meant to have the contest and choose the best entries to complete the doors of the baptistry. This contest had specific conditions of the copper plate for each one of the individuals submitting an entry. So it had to be one single plaque, copper. It had a specific size and margins, and it had a series of conditions appearing in the image. So there was a little bit of a unified elements when they were going to compare one image to another. That's the reason why there's so many conditions to make the decision a little bit more on fair in terms of what they were comparing. The entries were going to be destroyed and the copper was going to be reused. But fortunately for the world, history of art and the world itself, the two best contestants were saved and they can be seen today. The best two entries were Ghiberti's entry and the second one was Brunelleschi's entry. And as I mentioned, the two of them have been preserved for us to see how difficult the Signoria had to make a decision between who of these two was going to get this very prestigious commission. So let's look at the two entries, and this is the fun part. I want you to cast 3 votes during this talk. Your first vote, I want it to be just by looking at these entries, and let's say it comes from your heart. Let's see what your heart tells you, which one is the one you would choose. This is Ghiberti, and side by side, this is Brunelleschi. So I'll give you a few seconds to choose, vote for yourselves, make a little note of it, and you'll see it's fun when I ask you for the second vote after I made a few descriptions. There is no right or wrong answer. It's just for you to keep it and to see if your vote changes or not during this talk. So I'll give you a few seconds. I'll just do a reverse count from 5 so that you cast your vote in a piece of paper or mentally. Ghiberti on the left, Brunelleschi on the right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so now you cast your vote based on what you see and what you prefer. Now I'll move on to some descriptions. Let's see Ghiberti's first. So simpler description of this image from Ghiberti, we look at what kind of composition this is. So this is a symmetric vertical composition. You can basically cut this image in the 2 halves, right and left. All the action is happening on the right. We read from left to right. So the left has the other elements that were needed, the 2 peasants, the donkey, the rock, and the tree. But the action is happening on the right. So when we read left to right, we know where our eyes have to stop. The eyes stop actually on the upper right quadrant. That's basically where everything, the narrative is telling us what's happening. Isaac has his knife on the right hand. Abraham has the knife on his right hand, and he's holding Isaac ready for the sacrifice while the angel is coming with the word of God to stop it right at the right moment. There had to be one image. One of the conditions is one image had to be rendered in a classical style. And this is what Ghiberti chose. He chose to have the very classical Greco-Roman sculpture of a kneeling boy as Isaac. So he fulfilled all the entries, conditions, and you can see in the narrative, as I mentioned, is a vertical symmetry, left less important than right. On the right is where you read the image, what this is telling you. And it's the upper right that carries the strength of the message from God, stopping it. This is very Gothic. We would say it's like a high medieval, high Gothic style. Again, very vertical. It typically from the Gothic styles, it leads your eyes to the top. So this is Ghiberti's entry in terms of reading it and having some description of it. Brunelleschi's entry in the description, when we start looking at what kind of composition this is not anymore a vertical composition like we saw with Ghiberti. This composition, it's actually circular. It takes our eyes everywhere. We start from the very strong elements on the left. We try to read it left to right, but we really can't read it that way. We have to go around in circles and see what's happening. The center of action is actually in the upper side, and most importantly in the very middle. It's where everything is happening. It stops you right in the middle. It doesn't actually allow your eyes to read from left to right. You come back to the middle in circles. In here, what we actually see also is that the classical image, or the image rendered in the classical style that Brunelleschi chose, is the boy that has the splinter on his foot. It's a very typical Greco-Roman image that we've all seen, but Brunelleschi brings it forward. He's not showing it to us in the typical classical way. Yes, this boy is taking a splinter, but we see the back of the head. We see a lot of the back on the shoulders. We don't see as much of the splinter in the foot. In terms of the composition is moving. It's uneasy. Brunelleschi has managed to put all of the elements that were needed, but he also added the sheep in there, which is the sheep that symbolizes the appearance of the sacrificial animal in lieu of Isaac. And that's the word of God. God says, you can stop it now. Here's the animal that you should sacrifice. So Brunelleschi makes a very complicated story. It's a moving, action-packed image. And furthermore, if you see here, Abraham has the knife on his right hand, and you can almost see it drawing blood from Isaac. Abraham is holding very strongly Isaac's neck. I mean, it's a very violent scene. And the angel brings the word of God, but it no longer has effect unless it actually pulls Abraham's hand from what he's doing. This is a very strong image, a very strong action. And the person who is actually doing it, it's centered on the individual. It's actually Abraham. Abraham is the one who has the strength here, the power here. And to stop him, the angel not only has to present the sheep and say, no, no, you have another animal to sacrifice here. But he's also grabbing the hand because the word is not enough. Brunelleschi's image represents a Renaissance image. This was new. This was something uneasy at the time, but it's a new world. It's the expression of this Renaissance sentiment of the individual power that we have, and no longer a passive vertical view and more easy reading. Brunelleschi makes you actually go around and see everything that's happening. With a brief explanation of the descriptions, I now want you to cast your second vote after these descriptions. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Your vote could be the same or it could be different, but at least you are drawing now on slightly different elements to cast your vote. So I'm going to again count from 5 to 0. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So now I'm going to give a little bit of an explanation of these particular images. Let's begin with Ghiberti. This image, very Gothic, as I mentioned, vertical. It has a vertical symmetry and it reads left to right. And it's a beautiful example of Gothic composition. In terms of how to make it, Ghiberti required 3 layers of copper to create this image. And the skills that were needed, again, this is the High Gothic. They've been doing this for many, many centuries. So it's not specific skills. And, he does need to finalize the doors. They are going to take anywhere between about 9 to 27 panels each door. So this is something that is easy to project how much time it would take. The skills that are needed are not specific skills. Anybody in Florence who worked with copper could actually do it. So Ghiberti could find people to hire, finalize the doors, calculate how much time it was going to take, and put them on hinges so that these doors could open and close. Brunelleschi's entry. Again, you can see that movement in the clothes of Abraham that's full of action. You can actually see also the 3D composition. Even though in a photo you don't see that much, you can actually guess the 2 peasants, for instance, and also Abraham. They are really coming out. And Brunelleschi achieved this fantastic effect by using 9 layers of copper. So instead of 3, Brunelleschi is using now 9. And also, this is an unusual composition. This is very Renaissance. It's very difficult to achieve. The movement that he puts into the whole narrative of this scene is new. He would need to train people working in copper to make sure that they can achieve this level of narrative in the 3D images. So basically, Brunelleschi requires 3 times more material. So just in terms of material, is 3 times more expensive. Also, he requires to either train for new skills or get people who have a higher level skill than Ghiberti's. So, in terms of the work, in terms of the salaries of the people doing this, it would also be more expensive. So, this particular entry requires more money for material and people. But also, it requires an additional level of complexity because of the weight, having anywhere between 9 and 27 of these very heavy panels. The hinges that normally would hold these doors of the baptistry would probably be having to be new kind of hinges, probably with the materials that they had and the way they used them. The hinges would have been breaking down frequently because of the heavy weight of the doors. So at the time, the question was, can we actually create these hinges? And if we can, it's an additional expense. So, taken together, we can make a lot of conclusions about which one has the highest artistic value, which one is more pleasing to the eye, which one would we like to have. But at the end, the explanation for your third vote is something that we all have to take in account when making a decision. So you are again the Signoria of Florence. Now you have the explanation after you saw the description of the two images, and I want you to cast your last vote. If you are the Signoria, who would you actually grant this commission to? Would it be Ghiberti on the left, or would it be Brunelleschi on the right? And I also want you to ponder, what was the element that helped you create or cast your first vote, your second vote, and your third vote? And what of these key elements do you think was important for you to feel confident with your final vote? So what happened is that Ghiberti got the commission. It's called Gates of Paradise because that's the narrative that they depict. And these are gorgeous. I recommend you to see Florence's Gates of Paradise. It's at the bottom of this slide. It's in a YouTube video on the restoration of these doors. The restoration was done not long ago, and it took 27 years to restore them. Interestingly, it took 27 years for Ghiberti to make them. It just happened to be that way, but now we can see them in their whole splendor as they were seen when Ghiberti first finished them. So, of course, Ghiberti got a very high, prestigious award. His name was everywhere. Everybody knew who he was. And as he was bringing these doors to fruition and putting them during those 27 years and beyond, everybody would know who he was walking on the streets. He was the great artist who made this. Brunelleschi, on the other hand, went on to severe depression, alcoholic binges of drinking, and didn't do anything with his life. Well, of course not. He didn't. He went on working great things and doing wonderful things. He lost this particular award, but he never stopped working. In 1418, if you remember, the dome of the cathedral, the cupola of the Duomo de Florencia, was not built. Somebody needed to build it. And we now actually identify that particular dome with Florence. It's an image we have all seen one way or another, and that was actually done also by a contest. In 1418, the Arte della Lana, which is the Wool Merchants Guild, this time was not the Signoria. They said, we have to hold a competition. We can no longer worship on an open space with the rain coming in and the leaves, from the trees coming in. We need to have our beautiful cathedral finished. The two main competitors, they were Ghiberti and Brunelleschi. Now, Ghiberti was very busy with the doors of the baptistry, and this time, Brunelleschi, his entry was worthy of the commission, so he won and he received the commission. So this Santa Maria del Fiore, the Duomo, the cupola is by Brunelleschi. So importantly, Brunelleschi did groundbreaking work doing this. In a way, we're very lucky that he didn't get the doors of the baptistry, because to build this Duomo, he actually created many new ways of building. He patented even ways to bring all of the materials high up as they were building it. He also created a series of pulleys to bring up the food on the lunch break to the workers, so that they didn't waste any time going all the way down and then coming all the way up. This was the tallest and largest freestanding Duomo since the last one had been built in the 400s, and it's Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. It took 1,000 years to surpass the size of Hagia Sophia's Duomo. And it is just an incredible feat of engineering that Brunelleschi did on his own by observation. He looked at the Pantheon in Rome. He also went to Istanbul. He looked at the different ways to do it, and he invented his own way. I recommend you to watch the PBS documentary on the Great Cathedral Mystery, because it was not only recently that people realized how Brunelleschi built it, and it's glorious. And if he had been won the other commission, well, maybe we wouldn't have this beautiful cathedral finished the way it is. So Brunelleschi did a wonderful thing. He was never ending, always working to improve himself, and brought a wonderful thing to fruition for all the world as World Heritage. To create this particular talk, these are the references that I recommend. Of course, there's many others, but I hope you enjoyed it and that you tune in to other of my YouTube channel videos. Thank you very much.